Hey there, I really wanted to give you a big boost of some meal inspiration for today. I am going to be showing you 30 of the world's best family dinners, at least in my opinion. Let's go get started. We're kicking today off by making this cheesy broccoli chicken and orzo skillet. This is a one-pan meal, so it's extra amazing. So to the pan on my stove, I have a tablespoon of hot olive oil. To the oil, I added 1 pound of chicken breast that I cubed, and then I seasoned it with a dash of salt and pepper and a half a teaspoon of paprika, onion powder, and garlic powder. I gave the chicken a good stir, and I let the chicken cook completely through. Once it was cooked through, I removed it to a separate bowl and I set this bowl to the side. To the same pan that we cooked the chicken in, I added an additional tablespoon of olive oil. Once the oil was hot, I added my 1 diced up white onion, and I let the onion soften. It took about 4 to 5 minutes. Once the onion was soft, I added my tablespoon of minced garlic, along with just a half a teaspoon of garlic powder and a half a teaspoon of paprika. I gave this a really good stir until the garlic was fragrant, just about 30 seconds, I'd say. And now I'm adding in my 2.5 cups of chicken broth, and I'm going to scrape any bits off of the bottom of my pan. After that, go ahead and add in your 1 cup of orzo and bring this up to a boil, and then let it simmer covered on your stove for about 2 minutes. After the 2 minutes of simmering, you are going to stir in your 3 cups of fresh broccoli florets, and then you are going to continue to let this simmer covered for an additional 8 to 9 minutes, or until your orzo is completely cooked. I did stir this occasionally while it was cooking. So here's what it looks like after my orzo's cooked. I'm adding in my half a cup of heavy cream along with our chicken that we cooked up earlier, and 1 cup of shredded sharp cheddar cheese. I have the heat off at this point, and I'm going to stir this to combine, and once the cheese melts, it's ready to serve. Here's my plate of dinner. I topped mine with fresh parsley, mainly to make it look pretty, and a little bit of pepper. I love making this meal for my family just because I typically have all these ingredients on hand, and it's so easy to throw together and delicious. I served it alongside of a side salad with Olive Garden ranch. Now we're making this spinach and cheese ravioli bake. To the pan on my stove, I have a tablespoon of hot olive oil. To the oil, I added 4 cups of fresh spinach along with a dash of salt and pepper. You are going to let this spinach cook and wilt down. It should only take about 5 minutes. Spinach wilts down so easily. I do also want to mention, if you're not the biggest spinach fan in the world, you could totally skip the spinach step for this recipe. Now we're going to begin to assemble our ravioli bake. There's a total of 2 layers for this recipe. So the first layer, you are going to put half of your 24-ounce jar of marinara sauce down, spread it out as even as possible. There's a total of 20 ounces of ravioli for this recipe, so use half of the amount of ravioli for this layer. I chose to use the spinach and ricotta ravioli, but you could use any type of ravioli you like. Now I'm pouring all of the spinach over the top of the ravioli at this point. Next, you are going to sprinkle half of the 1.5 cups of Parmesan cheese over the top of the spinach. Next, pour half of the 2 cups of mozzarella cheese over that, and then repeat this for the second layer. The very last thing you will do is cover the top with aluminum foil, and this will bake in a preheated oven to 400 degrees for about 30 to 35 minutes, and then uncover it and bake it for an additional 5 to 10 minutes. This is another one of those go-to type of dinners that I like to make when I don't necessarily know what I'm going to make for dinner. Plus, my entire family devours this one. I served it alongside of a side salad and garlic toast. This meatless meal is a 10 out of 10. This one is an extremely fun one. We are making cheeseburger quesadillas. To begin, to the pan on my stove, I added 1 pound of ground beef. I broke it up with my meat masher and I cooked it through. While the ground beef was cooking away, we started on a special sauce. So to this little bowl, I added in a 1/2 cup of mayonnaise. Next, 2 tablespoons of white onion that I diced into small pieces. And then 2 tablespoons of dill pickle relish. Next, add about 4 tablespoons of ketchup. The last ingredient is 2 teaspoons of white vinegar. I gave this a really good whisk and then I stored it in the fridge until our quesadillas were through cooking. But now that we have our ground beef cooked through, I removed any grease in the pan. Then I added in about 4 tablespoons of ketchup and about 3 tablespoons of yellow mustard. I gave this a really good stir to let it kind of become like a sauce. Then I set it to the side. You'll see it's actually quite a bit of fun assembling these quesadillas. So to a new clean pan on my stove, I sprayed it with a little bit of avocado oil spray. Once the oil was hot, I added a medium-sized tortilla down. Now over that tortilla, you are going to sprinkle some shredded sharp cheddar cheese on top. You could add as much or as little cheese as you want. And then over the cheese, I'm adding that ground beef mixture. This recipe makes about 4 of these quesadillas, I'd say. But now over that ground beef mixture, you are going to add any hamburger toppings you like. I chose to do just pickles and onions, but bacon would be really good even. The last couple things I added was more cheese and another tortilla on the top. I served my quesadilla with some of that special sauce, and when I was growing up back in elementary school, when they'd run out of hamburger buns at lunchtime, they'd actually serve them in tortillas. So this is kind of what gave me an idea for this recipe. It is so good. I'm sure you are going to love it as much as I do. Now we're making this one pan all-in-one breakfast, but you could also make this for dinner, of course. I have my sheet pan sprayed with nonstick spray, and then I added my 1 package of refrigerated hash browns to the pan, along with 2 tablespoons of butter. Then for the seasonings, a 1/2 teaspoon of salt and pepper, a 1/2 teaspoon of Italian seasoning, 1/2 teaspoon of garlic powder, 1/2 teaspoon of dried thyme, and then 1/4 teaspoon of dried basil. I kind of gave this a stir to combine all of the ingredients together. We love bacon in my house, so I have my 12-ounce package of bacon right here. I'm actually slicing it in half, so I'm only using 6 ounces of bacon for this recipe. And I'm placing the half strips of bacon onto my sheet pan. I'm kind of scattering it all around. Then this baked in a preheated oven to 400 degrees for about 22 minutes. After 22 minutes, I removed it from the oven. Now this is really easy and fun. You are going to crack about 5 eggs all around the sheet pan, just like this. And then after you are finished placing all the eggs around, you're going to season them just with a little salt and pepper. And then on the very top of everything, I added about a 1/2 cup of shredded cheddar cheese. Of course, the cheese is optional. You don't have to add it if you don't want to. And then this baked in a preheated oven to 400 degrees still for an additional 20 minutes or until the eggs were cooked. You could eat this however you choose to do so, but what we like to do is we like to put this hash brown bacon and egg mixture inside of warm tortillas, then we roll them up, and then there you go. You have the easiest breakfast burritos ever. This recipe is so simple to throw together. It will really impress you. I never ever make gnocchi, but I've been wanting to make it for a while, so now we're making this sausage and tomato gnocchi. To my Dutch oven on the stove, I added 1 diced up white onion along with a pound of sausage. For the seasonings, I added in a teaspoon of Italian seasoning, a teaspoon of garlic powder, then a 1/2 teaspoon of pepper and salt. The last thing I added in was a tablespoon of minced garlic. I broke the sausage up and I am going to cook it through at this point. Now that we have our sausage browned and cooked through, I'm removing any excess grease in the pan. I'm just doing it with my spatula and a paper towel. I found that this little trick works wonderfully. Now I'm going to add in our 3/4 cup of heavy cream along with a can of diced tomatoes. I like using the Italian style petite diced tomatoes, but you could use any diced tomatoes you like. For the gnocchi, I'm using 16 ounces of potato gnocchi. I found it at my local Walmart. Most grocery stores sell it. And then I added in 4 cups of fresh spinach. I gave this a stir and I let it simmer on my stove for about 12 to 15 minutes. I did stir it frequently. Now that we have our gnocchi cooked and our spinach has wilted down dramatically, as you could see, I added in about 1.5 cups of mozzarella cheese that I shredded. I gave this a stir to let the cheese melt down, and then it was time to enjoy it. I sprinkled the top of mine with fresh parsley and Parmesan cheese, mainly to make it look pretty, but if you don't normally eat gnocchi and if you haven't tried it, I definitely suggest you trying it. It's kind of like a mixture of potato and pasta. That's the best way I could describe it. I serve this alongside of a side salad with spring mix, tomato, dried cranberries, and avocado with feta cheese. Now we're getting started on our meatless meal, the Southwestern skillet. So to begin, we are going to cut up our veggies, 1 red bell pepper and a yellow onion. If you want to use other veggies for this recipe, you certainly can. Now over to the pan on my stove, I have about 2 tablespoons of hot olive oil in there. I added those veggies and I'm going to cook them until they are soft. It took about 7 minutes. Now that they are soft, I added in a tablespoon of minced garlic. I gave this a stir and let the garlic become fragrant. Now I'm going to be adding in our 2 tablespoons of taco seasoning along with 1 cup of Orzo pasta. If you don't normally cook with Orzo pasta, it's kind of like a mixture between rice and pasta. It really is good. Now I'm adding in 1 can of drained and rinsed black beans, a drained can of corn, and 2 cups of chicken broth. Next I'm going to toss in 1 can of rotel. I gave this a really good stir and I let this simmer covered on my stove for about 15 to 20 minutes or until the orzo was cooked, and I did stir this frequently while it was simmering. Now that our orzo has cooked and most of the liquid has absorbed, I'm going to add in about 1/2 cup of Mexican style cheese. If you don't care for cheese, you certainly do not need to add the cheese in, and you can make this dairy-free very easily, but here's my plate of food. I topped mine with fresh avocado slices, cilantro, and lime. This has to be one of my all-time favorite meatless meals, just because it really is filling. It has quite a bit of protein in it, and we really did not miss the meat in this meal. Now we're making this beef stew, and this is the only beef stew recipe you will ever need just because it is that good. To begin, I sliced my carrots, I diced my onion, and then I peeled and diced my 4 medium-sized russet potatoes. I'll set these veggies to the side. We're going to sear our beef stew meat right now. So over to the pan on my stove, I tossed in 2 tablespoons of olive oil. Once the oil was hot, I grabbed my beef stew meat and I seasoned it with a little dash of salt and pepper. Then I added it right into my pan. You are going to sear this on high heat for about 3 minutes. This is going to make your beef stew meat nice and kind of like caramelized on the outside. It is going to give it so much great flavor and it's going to taste super rich and delicious. But if you don't have time to sear your meat, I totally understand. You could skip that step and this will still turn out so delicious. I added that beef stew meat right into my slow cooker along with a tablespoon of minced garlic, 2 tablespoons of Worcestershire sauce. Then for the beef broth, I tossed in about 3.5 cups of that. Next, you're going to add in the veggies that we cut up earlier, and then you are going to add in 8 ounces of tomato sauce, which is just kind of like half of this can. I do want to let you know, whenever I don't use a full can of something, I like to put the remaining amount of stuff that's in the can in a Ziploc bag, and then I just freeze it. But for the seasonings, I added in 2 bay leaves, a teaspoon of paprika, 2 teaspoons of dried thyme, 2 teaspoons of dried rosemary, then a teaspoon of salt and 1/2 teaspoon of pepper. I gave this a really good stir. You're going to put the lid on top and cook this on low for about 7 to 8 hours. Once the cooking time was up, I removed about 3/4 cup of the broth in the slow cooker and I added it to this bowl along with 1/4 cup of flour, and I'm going to whisk this all together until it's smooth. This is going to help thicken our stew up. So now I'm going to add it right into our beef stew and I am going to just kind of whisk it in there, and then I'm going to let this continue to cook for an additional 20 minutes, and like I said, this will really thicken the stew up. After the 20 minutes of cooking, this was ready to serve, so now I'm just going to remove the 2 bay leaves because nobody wants to accidentally eat a bay leaf, and then I placed it into my soup bowls and then I served it. We like to sprinkle ours with a little bit of black pepper and salt on the top. This has amazing, rich, bold flavor. That beef stew meat is like fall apart tender. I wish I showed you that part, but this is amazing. You definitely need to try this recipe this fall and winter. This one is our meatless meal. We are making this one pot Mexican quinoa and veggies dish. To the pan on my stove, I added a tablespoon of olive oil. Once it was hot, I tossed in my 1 jalapeno that I diced and a tablespoon of minced garlic. I let this cook together for about a minute or so, and I do want to let you know, if you're not a fan of jalapeno, you could always substitute it for bell pepper or onion or just not add it in. Now I'm tossing in my 1 cup of quinoa that I rinsed, a cup of chicken broth, or you could use veggie broth, a can of drained and rinsed black beans, a can of drained corn. Next, I'm adding in 1 can of fire roasted diced tomatoes, or you could use regular diced tomatoes. And then for the seasonings, a teaspoon of chili powder and 1/2 teaspoon of cumin with a dash of salt and pepper. Give this a stir, and then I let this simmer on my stove covered for about 18 to 22 minutes. Or until that quinoa was tender. I did stir it occasionally while it was simmering. The very last thing I did was, once my quinoa was nice and fluffy, I added in the juice from 1 lime. I gave this a stir, and then it was time to serve it up. Here's my plate of food. I topped mine with a little bit of cheese, guacamole, sour cream, tomatoes, fresh lime, and cilantro. This has amazing flavor, and this is one of those meals that I actually like to meal prep for lunch throughout the week. Taco salads are extra perfect in the summertime, so now I'm going to show you my all-time favorite taco salad recipe. We're going to start on the chipotle dressing first. So in this bowl, I added a cup of mayonnaise along with the juice from 1 lime. All of the seasonings you're going to be adding in is 2 teaspoons of chili powder, a teaspoon of onion powder, a teaspoon of garlic powder, a teaspoon of cumin, a 1/2 teaspoon of paprika, a 1/4 teaspoon of chipotle powder, and then a dash of salt and pepper. If you want yours a little bit spicy, go ahead and add in 1/8 teaspoon of cayenne, and then you're also going to add in between 1/3 cup of milk to 1/2 cup of milk, just depending on how thick you want it. Whisk it all together and then put it into a dressing container and let it chill in the refrigerator while you work on the rest of the stuff for your taco salads. The meat that we're using for our taco salads is ground beef, or you could use shredded chicken, or you could keep this meatless if you don't want to add meat, whatever your preference is. I just cooked my ground beef up on the stove, removed any of the excess grease, and now I'm adding about 1.5 tablespoons of taco seasoning in with 1/4 cup of water and 1 can of drained and rinsed pinto beans. You're going to just mix this all together and let everything simmer for about 5 minutes on the stove. My all-time favorite lettuce mixture for these taco salads is actually a mix of romaine lettuce and spinach. I did quite a bit of lettuce just because we had my sister over for dinner on that night. I just put it into my salad spinner and I cleaned it off and then spun any excess water off. I love this salad spinner. If you don't have one, I actually have a similar one linked in my Amazon store. But anyways, after I'm finished with that, I am just going to remove any excess water in my salad spinner. For the rest of the veggies, I just cut up cherry tomatoes, avocado, and green onions. Now, all you have to do is assemble your taco salad. So I just put on the bottom of my bowl that lettuce mixture along with the ground beef and beans, the cherry tomatoes, avocado, green onions, tortilla strips, and shredded cheese. I really do think what kicks these taco salads up a notch is that homemade Southwest Chipotle dressing. It really does have immense flavor. These are just great hearty salads to make. This white chicken lasagna soup is so good. To the pot on my stove, I added in about 2 tablespoons of olive oil once it was hot. I tossed in my 1 pound of cubed chicken breast, and I'll season that chicken with a dash of salt, pepper, and dried basil. I gave this a stir and I let the chicken cook through at this point. While we have our chicken cooking away, I am going to cut up our veggies. So to the cutting board, I diced my 2 large carrots and I diced my onion into smaller pieces. I'll set these veggies to the side and back over to our now cooked chicken. I'm going to remove it to a plate and I'm going to set this plate to the side. Into that same pot that we cooked our chicken in, I tossed a tablespoon of olive oil and 2 tablespoons of butter in there. Once the butter started to melt down, I added in those veggies that we cut up earlier, and I gave this a stir and I let these veggies cook for about 4 to 5 minutes to start to soften up. Now that they are soft, I added in 1/3 cup of all-purpose flour and I gave this a stir. I let this flour cook in with those veggies for about 2 minutes. After those 2 minutes, I slowly added in my 8 cups of chicken broth. You do want to make sure you add that chicken broth in slowly and whisk it while you add it in, just to ensure that you don't have any clumps in your soup in the end. Go ahead and add our cooked chicken right back in there along with a drained and rinsed can of cannellini beans. Next, you're going to add in the seasonings: 2 teaspoons of dried basil, a teaspoon of dried parsley, half a teaspoon of oregano, and then 1.5 teaspoons of salt and 1/2 teaspoon of pepper. Give this a really good stir. Now it's time to add in our lasagna noodles. So you'll want to add in between 8 to 10 lasagna noodles, and you do want to break them up into smaller bite-sized pieces just like this so your soup is easier to eat. But after you add those in there, you are going to give this a stir and let this simmer on your stove, stirring it frequently for about 22 minutes or until the noodles are tender. But now we're at that point and you're going to add in your 2 cups of half and half and 10 ounces of thawed out frozen spinach. Stir this all together, and then after you are finished stirring this all together, it is cheese time, my favorite part. You'll add in a cup of mozzarella cheese and a cup of Parmesan cheese. Let the cheese melt down, and then it is time to serve. This is seriously the most beautiful, hearty, delicious soup for this time of year. It has so much great flavor, and my husband and myself, we could eat bowls and bowls of this. Also, my little toddler Brinley loves it, so it is a win-win for my family. Now we're making this Italian grinder sandwich, and it is viral all over the internet right now, so I wanted to give it a try. This is kind of like my take on it. So to begin, we are going to start with our vegetables: 1 red onion, a tomato, and a smaller head of iceberg lettuce. I cut those veggies up. Now I'm going to set them to the side. In this bowl, we're going to start on the grinder mixture now. So I added 1 cup of mayonnaise. Next, add 2 tablespoons of red wine vinegar. The red wine vinegar adds so much great flavor. A teaspoon of salt, half a teaspoon of pepper, a tablespoon of minced garlic. Then add in 2 teaspoons of dried oregano, then 1/4 cup of grated Parmesan cheese. Give this a whisk to combine the ingredients. Now go ahead and add in about 1/4 cup of sliced banana peppers with about a tablespoon of that banana pepper juice. Then add in your sliced up lettuce and onions. Give this a really good stir to coat the onions and the lettuce in that sauce. Then place this in your refrigerator to store. Now we're going to start on our bread. I have one of these large loaves of bread that I grabbed from Walmart. You will just see me slicing it in half lengthwise right now. After I was through slicing it in half lengthwise, I removed some of the excess bread from the center just like this. I do like doing this just because it does add a little bit more emphasis on the meat and the grinder mixture in the center. So now I am going to be adding slices of Swiss cheese on that bread, or you could use any type of cheese you like. I place this in my oven to bake on a sheet pan lined with parchment paper on 375 degrees for about 10 minutes. If you don't want to bake this, you certainly don't have to, but it's very minimal time that it does bake in your oven, and it does add quite a bit of flavor. Now that we have our cheese perfectly melty and the bread is nice and crisp, we are going to be adding our sliced tomatoes on one side. And over those sliced tomatoes, you are going to be adding all of the grinder mixture that we made up. That grinder mixture is absolutely out of this world good. Every day since I've made it, I have craved it. It is really, truly that good. Now for the meats that we're going to be putting over the grinder mixture, I'm just using sliced mesquite turkey, pepperoni, and salami, but you could use any type of deli meats that you enjoy. After I sliced this up, it was ready to eat, and I know exactly why this is viral all over the internet right now. This has to be one of my all-time favorite sandwiches ever. It is packed full of flavor, and it is just so good. You definitely have to try this variation of it. I was skeptical about it at first, but trust me, I will be making this all the time from now on. Now we're making this chicken cordon bleu casserole, and woohoo, let me tell you, this is not your boring type of casserole at all. None of these are. To begin, to this medium-sized bowl, I added in a 10-ounce can of cream of chicken soup. Next, add in about 1/3 cup of water and whisk this all together. This will kind of form a sauce. I'll set this mixture to the side. I pulled out my 9x13 baking dish and I sprayed it with nonstick spray. I added in 4 cups of cooked shredded chicken. I just cooked my chicken up in the Instant Pot, then shredded it from there. Now I'm going to be adding some slices of ham on top. This is just sliced deli ham, but you could really use any type of ham you like. You could even use like cubed ham, but I just used Black Forest ham. Over the ham, add slices of Swiss cheese, and then over the Swiss cheese, you are going to pour the sauce that we made up with the cream of chicken soup over that. The last couple things we will do is first add a box of stuffing mix to the top. I'm just using the stovetop chicken flavor. This will add a really nice crunch, you gotta trust me. And then over the stuffing mix, you'll just add 1/3 cup of melted butter. Cover this with aluminum foil and bake this in a preheated oven to 350 degrees for about 40 minutes. After 40 minutes of baking, you will just pull this out of the oven, remove the foil, and let this continue to bake for an additional 20 minutes. We like to serve this over a bed of white rice, but you could serve this over egg noodles or mashed potatoes, really anything you'd like. I also served this with steamed peas on the side, but seriously, you guys, you need to give this recipe a try. I know this one might seem a little bit different and odd, but just trust me, you will devour this like I do. Now I'm showing you my all-time favorite broccoli and cheese soup. So I'm just starting out by cutting up my broccoli, shredding my carrots, and dicing my onion into smaller pieces. Over to my large pot, I'm adding 1/4 cup of butter. Once the butter has melted down, I'm adding the broccoli, carrots, and onion that we just cut up. Let them soften. It should take about 5 minutes. Now that our veggies are soft, add in your 1/4 cup of all-purpose flour, stir it around until the flour no longer looks white, and then you will be adding in your 1½ cups of chicken broth followed by a dash of salt and pepper. For your cream and milk, add in 1 cup of heavy cream and then 1 cup of regular milk. Give this a good stir, and then you're going to let this simmer but stir it very frequently for about 10 minutes on your stove or until it has thickened. Now that our soup looks like this, turn the heat off and then add in your 1½ cup of shredded sharp cheddar cheese. Stir the cheese in to let it melt down, and then your broccoli and cheese soup is ready to serve. This broccoli and cheese soup is perfect for this time of year. I topped mine with a little bit more cheese and salt and pepper. It is so rich, creamy, and divine. Now we're making these stuffed bacon-wrapped chicken breasts, and oh man, so to get them started, I have a 1/4 cup of shredded sharp cheddar cheese right here and a 1/4 cup of mozzarella cheese I added into this bowl. Next, I added in 3 tablespoons of softened cream cheese. For the seasonings, I added in a 1/2 teaspoon of onion powder and a 1/2 teaspoon of garlic powder. Next, I added in a dash of pepper and salt. I gave this a really good stir so these cheeses were combined well. I have my 3 large chicken breasts right here, and I sliced them in half horizontally, and as you see, I didn't go all the way through while slicing them in half. I kind of just created a pocket. Now we're going to be generously filling each of the chicken breasts with some of that cheesy mixture. This is my favorite part. Now that all my chicken breasts are stuffed, we are going to be wrapping the chicken breasts with bacon. I'm just using regular bacon, and I used about 1 to 2 slices for each chicken breast. Just gauge it depending on how big your chicken breasts are. Now moving over to my sheet pan that I have lined with aluminum foil, I have about 2 to 3 pounds of russet potatoes right here that I cut into wedges. We were feeling like wedges on that night, so that's why I did that. And you do want to make sure you use russet potatoes for this recipe, just because they will hold up better than red potatoes or golden potatoes. I added a little bit of pepper to the top of the potatoes. You don't need to add oil because the bacon provides plenty of oil. Then this baked on 400 degrees for about 40 to 45 minutes or until my chicken was cooked through. And here's the finished product. Cooking your chicken like this and stuffing it ensures that it will not be dry in the end. And we like to dip our wedges in a little bit of ketchup. That chicken is not your normal chicken. It's so good. And then I served it with a side salad with tomatoes, broccoli, and a little bit of celery. And this ranch is super good. I definitely recommend it. Now we're getting started on this zucchini chicken stuffing bake. And some people have mentioned that they don't care for using canned cream of soups in recipes, so I really wanted to show you this substitute that you could use instead of using canned cream of soups. You could do this for any of my recipes. To the pan on my stove, I melted down 3 tablespoons of butter, then I added in 3 tablespoons of all-purpose flour. Once the flour was a nice golden color, I slowly added in 3/4 cup of chicken broth. I did whisk it while adding it in just to ensure that it didn't become clumpy. Now I'm going to pour in my 1/2 cup of milk and whisk it well. For the seasonings, I tossed in 1/2 teaspoon of salt and pepper, and you could always add in 1/4 cup of water at a time, just until this gets to your desired consistency if this is a little bit too thick for you. I set this to the side. We're going to work on our veggies now. I'm cutting my 2 zucchinis into smaller pieces as well as my 1 onion. I set our veggies to the side. We're going to start on our stuffing mixture now. So I have my 1 6-ounce box of stovetop stuffing right here. I added that box into my bowl. Then I added 4 tablespoons of melted butter, and I gave this a good stir to coat the stuffing in the butter. I'm removing about 3/4 cup of this stuffing and I'm setting it to the side. We're going to be using this for the top of our casserole. Now I have my replacement to the cream of soup right here. I just added it in, or of course you could add a can of cream of mushroom or chicken soup. Anyways, then I added in 3 cups of shredded rotisserie chicken along with the zucchini and the onion that we cut up earlier. Next, add in a 1/2 cup of sour cream along with a dash of pepper and salt. Give this a really good stir. I have my 9x13 baking dish right here. I made sure to spray it with plenty of nonstick spray. Then I added that casserole right in there. I spread it out as even as possible, and then over the top of the casserole, of course, you will sprinkle the reserved stuffing mixture over it. This will bake in a preheated oven to 350 degrees for about 35 to 45 minutes or until the top is golden brown. Here's my plate of dinner, and all I could say about this one is, oh boy, I could serve this to my family every single week and we would not get tired of it. It's seriously that good. It definitely reminds us of Thanksgiving. And then I served it alongside of a side salad with romaine lettuce and spinach, fresh broccoli, cherry tomatoes, dried cranberries, and a little bit of ranch dressing. Now we're making this cracked chicken casserole. To begin, in my pot of boiling water, I'm adding about 1.5 cups of dry elbow pasta noodles, and then I cooked them according to the box directions. You could really use any type of pasta you like for this recipe. Over to my pan on the stove, I'm adding 6 slices of bacon that I cut into smaller pieces. Just cook this bacon up right now. After my bacon was cooked, I removed it to a separate plate lined with paper towels, and I'll be the first to admit I did kind of burn my bacon a little bit. I got sidetracked watching my daughter in the other room, but anyways, after I set the bacon to the side, I did save 2 tablespoons of the bacon grease in my pan. I added my 1 onion and I softened the onion. Now over to this large bowl, I'm adding my 1 cup of sour cream. Next, add 1 cup of heavy cream, or you could use half and half, and then 4 ounces of softened cream cheese, 1 can of cream of chicken soup, and then 2.5 tablespoons of ranch seasoning. Mix this together. I used an electric mixer just to make my life easy. The rest of the ingredients you'll be tossing in is a 1/2 teaspoon of black pepper, a dash of salt, 2 cups of cooked chicken. I used part of a rotisserie chicken, or of course you could just cook your chicken up on your own and then cube it and shred it from there. And then our cooked noodles along with the onion that we softened. Half of the amount of the bacon that we cooked up, you'll want to save the other half of the bacon for on top. A 1/2 cup of shredded sharp cheddar cheese, and then stir this to combine. After I placed this in my greased baking dish, I sprinkled plenty more cheese on top, and then I added the rest of the bacon along with a few green onions that I sliced. We love green onions in our home. I do also want to mention this recipe is so easy to double, so if you want to make it for a really large amount of people, you could double this easily. This baked on 375 degrees for about 35 minutes. Here's my cracked chicken casserole. It is so cheesy and creamy and delicious. It has the perfect amount of flavor of everything in it. You will definitely want to make this one. It is comfort food to the max. Now we're making these taco stuffed peppers, and to get this recipe started, you'll need about 2 cups of cooked chicken. I do want to show you how I'm cooking up my chicken in the Instant Pot. It is so easy to do it this way. I added my big frozen chicken breast along with 1 cup of water. I set the valve to sealing and I put this on high pressure for 23 minutes with a quick release, and then there you go. You have really easy to shred chicken. But if you don't want to do it in the Instant Pot, you could always use a rotisserie chicken for this recipe, or you could boil your chicken over a pot of water on the stove. But I set our chicken to the side to get started on the bell peppers. Now I have 6 small to medium sized bell peppers. I cut the tops off and I removed the insides of the peppers. I am going to bring them over to my pot of boiling water, and I'm going to let these bell peppers boil in there for about 6 to 7 minutes to let them get soft. While we have our peppers cooking away, I'm going to start on the filling now. So to this large bowl, I added in our shredded chicken. Next, add in 1 cup of drained and rinsed black beans, 1 cup of cooked white rice. And here's my little trick that I've been doing recently. They sell these rice containers at the grocery store. They're pre-cooked rice containers, and when I only need a little bit of rice for a recipe, I like adding these in just because it's so simple, and so I don't have to cook rice on the side. It's just less effort for me in the summertime. Then I added in 1 cup of salsa and 2 tablespoons of taco seasoning. Give this a really good stir to combine the ingredients. Now that we have our bell peppers nice and fork tender, you do want to make sure they're only fork tender. You don't want them to be too soft so they're falling apart, but I added them into my large casserole dish. Now generously fill our bell peppers with that chicken mixture that we just made up. And I do want to mention to you, if you want to make this into a meatless meal, it is so easy to transform this recipe to a meatless meal because all you have to do is substitute the chicken for more beans. But I topped our bell peppers with a little bit of pepper jack cheese, and I baked this on 400 degrees for about 20 minutes to melt the cheese down and to cook a little bit. Here's what they look like out of the oven. The outside is perfectly tender and the inside is spot on delicious. I also love how you can make this recipe your own so easily. You could always add ingredients to it or subtract ingredients to kind of just make it the way you want it. Now we're making this old-fashioned goulash, and oh boy, this recipe's perfect for this time of year. To begin, in my Dutch oven, I added my 1 pound of ground beef. I'm breaking the ground beef up with my meat masher, and I'm cooking it until it's about 90% of the way cooked through. If you have a ton of grease in your pan at this point, go ahead and remove any excess grease. And then I added my 1 white onion that I diced along with a tablespoon of minced garlic. I let the ground beef cook through and the onion get soft, and then I added my 1/2 cup of beef broth along with 2.5 cups of water, 30 ounces of tomato sauce, 30 ounces of diced tomatoes, and then for the seasonings, add in 2 bay leaves. You might not think the bay leaves do much, but they really do. And then a tablespoon of Italian seasoning. Give this a really good stir, and then I let this simmer on my stove covered for about 10 minutes. After the time of simmering is up, you will add in your 2.5 cups of uncooked elbow noodles, and then let this continue to simmer for an additional 15 to 20 minutes or until the noodles are cooked. You do want to stir this frequently so the noodles don't stick to the bottom of your pot. Also, if your water line does get too low while your goulash is simmering, you could always add in about 1/2 cup more water in at a time. But now that my goulash is cooked, I removed the 2 bay leaves. I added in a dash of salt and pepper along with 1/2 cup of shredded sharp cheddar cheese. I let the cheese melt down and then it was ready to serve. Here's my plate of food. This goulash is definitely a kid-friendly meal and adult-friendly. My daughter devours it and so do I. I served it alongside of a side salad with spinach, romaine, cherry tomatoes, avocado, and dried cranberry with this Bolthouse Farms ranch on it. I really do love that ranch. Now we're making this perfect cooked chicken and vegetable stir fry. Sometimes I do get questions about how I make my white rice, so I'm going to show you how I make it in my Instant Pot. I spray the bottom of my Instant Pot with nonstick spray, and then I add my 2 cups of rinsed jasmine or white rice, and then I add in 2 cups of water. I give it a stir, and then I put the lid on top, set it to sealing, and then I just press the rice button, and that is all you have to do. So now that our rice is cooking, I'm going to start on the stir fry. In my pan, I have a tablespoon of hot olive oil, and then I added my 1 pound of cubed chicken breast. I seasoned the chicken with a dash of salt and pepper, and then I let the chicken cook through. While our chicken is cooking away, I am going to start on the vegetables. You could use any veggies you like for this stir fry, but I used what I had on hand. So I used 4 ounces of mushrooms that I sliced, a half a pound of asparagus, a couple large carrots that I sliced, and a small head of broccoli. Now that our chicken is cooked, I'm removing it to a separate plate, and I am going to set this plate to the side. In the same pan that we cooked our chicken in, I added an additional tablespoon of olive oil, and then add the veggies and saute these veggies around until they get soft. Once our veggies are to the softness that we like them to be, I removed them to a separate bowl and I set that bowl to the side. In the same pan that we cooked the veggies in, I added an additional tablespoon of olive oil along with a tablespoon of minced garlic and ginger. I gave this a whisk to let the garlic and ginger become fragrant and took about 30 seconds. And then I added in my teaspoon of sesame oil along with 1 cup of chicken broth, a third a cup of low sodium soy sauce, a tablespoon of brown sugar, and then you will whisk this together and bring this mixture up to a simmer. Once it does start to simmer, you will slowly sift in your 1/4 a cup of all-purpose flour. You do want to whisk it while you are sifting it in, and you do want to make sure you do sift it in just to ensure that there are no flour clumps that form in your sauce. But bring the sauce up to a simmer, and then once it does thicken up, you will add back in the cooked vegetables and the cooked chicken, coat the veggies and the chicken in the sauce, and then it is ready to serve. Of course, I served our stir fry over the rice that we made up in the Instant Pot together, but this stir fry is so phenomenal. The sauce is out of this world, and I love how you could toss so many different vegetables in there, and it really does come out perfect. This one's a super fun one. We are making this pizza pasta bake now. So to my large casserole dish, I am spraying it with plenty of nonstick spray just for easy cleanup. Then I added in 14 ounces of petite diced tomatoes. Next, you'll add in about 1.5 cups of marinara sauce. Per usual, you could use any brand of marinara sauce you like. And then to give this extra flavor, I added in 2 teaspoons of Italian seasoning, a 1/2 teaspoon of pepper, and a teaspoon of salt. I gave this a stir, and then I set it to the side. We are going to start to work on the chicken now. I have my 2 large chicken breasts right here. I'm going to be slicing them in half horizontally. So now it's going to appear as kind of like 4 chicken breasts. If you've seen any of my other videos, you might know why I like doing this so much, but I like doing it just because the chicken will be so tender in the end, and it will help the chicken cook a little bit quicker. But now to the sauce that we made up a little bit earlier, I am adding our chicken right in there, and I am going to season the chicken with a dash of salt and pepper. And then I'm going to coat the chicken in the sauce. I place this in a preheated oven to 400 degrees to bake for about 35 to 45 minutes or until the chicken was completely cooked through. But now that our chicken is cooked, I am going to start on the cornstarch slurry just to thicken it up a little bit. In this little bowl, I have a tablespoon of cornstarch. To the cornstarch, I added a tablespoon of water, and I gave this a really good stir. I set this to the side, and then I pulled out our baking dish, and I'm going to pour the cornstarch slurry all over the top. And then I gave this a little stir. Next, over the top of everything, you are going to sprinkle 1 cup of shredded mozzarella cheese. Now, this is the fun part for the pepperonis. This is optional, but I do like adding them on top. It just kind of is fun. And then I sprinkled a little bit more cheese, and I baked this for an additional 10 to 15 minutes. We love eating this dinner over pasta, so to my pot of boiling water, I added in about 10 ounces of pasta. You could use any type of pasta you like, but we really like using the fun shapes just for this recipe because it's a little bit more fun. But once our baking dish was out of the oven, it was time to serve it up. Here's my plate of food. I served it over the pasta, of course, and with the chicken and plenty of the sauce. This is full of flavor, and I really think this one might surprise you. It really is delicious. I served it alongside of a side salad with spinach, carrots, cherry tomatoes, and feta cheese with a little bit of ranch for the dressing. I've been craving these Parmesan crusted pork chops like crazy recently, so now that's what we're making. To begin, in this bowl, I added a 1/2 cup of all-purpose flour. In the bowl behind it, I'm adding 3/4 cup of these plain panko breadcrumbs, along with a 1/2 cup of Parmesan cheese. Stir these 2 ingredients together, and then in the third bowl, you will whisk together 2 eggs along with a tablespoon of water. Okay, it really truly cannot get any easier than this. So I have my 4 medium thick boneless pork chops right here. I did season them on both sides with a dash of salt and pepper. I first coat them in the flour mixture, and then I coat them in the egg mixture, and then lastly you will coat them really well in the panko and Parmesan mixture, and then set them on a separate plate. That is all you do. Over to the pan on my stove, I'm adding 2 tablespoons of olive oil right in there. Once the oil gets hot, go ahead and add your pork chops in. I like to cook these for about 3 to 5 minutes on each side or until they're cooked through. And a little secret for cooking these pork chops is only flip them once while cooking. That's how you can get a really nice crust on the outside. And while they're cooking away, I do like to serve this with brown gravy. I just use one of these packets. It's kind of like a shortcut for making brown gravy, and it is amazing. All you have to do is add the packet in along with water, let it simmer and thicken, and there you go. You have really simple gravy to serve with these pork chops. Once our pork chops were through cooking, I served them over a bed of mashed potatoes with plenty of the brown gravy. This is total comfort food to the max for me. Those pork chops have amazing flavor with the panko and the Parmesan combined, and then they do have a really beautiful crust on the outside. They're just so good. This Italian chicken is very simple to make, so we're going to start on the sauce first. In this little bowl, I added 3 tablespoons of olive oil. Next, I tossed in 1/3 cup of balsamic vinegar. And then for the seasonings, I added in 2 teaspoons of Italian seasoning and 1 teaspoon of garlic powder. I gave this a really good whisk. To make everything extra easy, I'm using a large gallon-sized Ziploc bag for this part. I added 2 large chicken breasts right in there. I did slice my chicken breasts in half horizontally to make them thin. I poured half of that sauce right in there, and I let this marinate in my fridge for at least an hour. When the marinating time was almost up, I started on the veggies. So into this large bowl, I added 2 medium-sized zucchinis that I diced into smaller pieces. I also added a pound of green beans that I trimmed and 1.5 cups of cherry tomatoes. I added the remaining sauce in there, and I gave this a stir. Moving over to my sheet pan that I have lined with parchment paper, I added those veggies right in there and I spread those veggies out. I am going to be placing our marinated chicken right into the center of the sheet pan. Then this is going to bake in a preheated oven to 425 degrees and it will bake for about 25 to 30 minutes or until the chicken is cooked through. This is another one of those meals. If you wanted to, you could easily meal prep this one. It's high in protein and veggies, which is great. And then this one also lasts well in the refrigerator and then it heats up nicely in the microwave. So I did want to let you know about that, but this meal is really good. Now we're making this chicken and bacon with vegetables to my slow cooker. I added about 1.5 pounds of chicken breast. My chicken was still a little bit frozen, but no worries there. Next, I'm going to be adding in 4 medium russet potatoes that I cut into smaller pieces like this. After the potatoes, add in 6 ounces of fresh or frozen green beans. For the seasonings, to ensure this has plenty of flavor, I added in 1/2 teaspoon of pepper and 2 tablespoons of ranch seasoning. Now over to my cutting board, I am going to be cutting up our bacon. I'm using 3 pieces of this fresh bacon. I just cut it into smaller bite-sized pieces just like this. Back over to my slow cooker, I added our bacon right in there, and I tried to make sure the bacon wasn't clumped up too much, so I tried to separate it. I put the lid on top and I cooked this on low for about 6 to 7 hours. Here's what dinner looks like. That chicken is so juicy from all of the flavor and the drippings from the bacon. The potatoes and the green beans are really nice and tender. If you're a bacon fan, you will definitely devour this dinner. Now we're making these mini personal-sized quesadillas. To begin, to the pan on my stove, I'm adding 1 pound of ground beef. If you don't want to use ground beef, you could always use ground turkey or any other ground meat or meat substitute that you'd like. After my ground beef was cooked through, I removed any grease from the pan, and now I'm adding in 1.5 tablespoons of taco seasoning and 1/3 cup of water. I'll give this a stir, and I'm going to let this simmer together for a few minutes. After my simmering time is up, it is now time to assemble our quesadillas. So I have a sheet pan here lined with parchment paper. I sprayed the parchment paper with some oil spray. Now I'm going to lay our tortillas down. I'm just using the street taco-sized flour tortillas. Those are our favorite for this recipe. Over all the tortillas, add some refried beans. I just used a can of refried beans. And then over the refried beans, add some of that ground beef taco mixture. And if you see a third hand in there, it is just my little helper, Macy. She was really enjoying the cheese. And then over the ground beef, add some shredded cheese. The last thing you will do is put another tortilla on the top, spray the top of the tortillas with some oil spray, and then bake this in a preheated oven to 450 degrees for about 8 to 12 minutes or until the tops of the tortillas are nice and crispy. My family loves when I make these quesadillas. They're super flavorful and good, and the coolest part about these quesadillas is you could really make these your own by adding ingredients or subtracting ingredients. You could add beans or corn and then serve these with your favorite toppings. Now we're making this sausage with cheesy tortellini. To get this one started, in my pot of boiling water, I'm adding my 12 ounces of cheese tortellini. Go ahead and cook it according to the bag directions, and you could use any type of tortellini that you could find at your grocery store. Now over to my large pot, I'm adding my 1 pound of Italian sausage in. I'm removing the casings on the sausage and adding it in, but again, you could use any type of Italian sausage you like. And then I'm going to break the sausage up and cook it through. Now that our tortellini is cooked, I'm going to remove about 1/4 cup of the water that the tortellini is cooking in, and I am going to reserve it for the sauce. You'll see why in a minute, but I'm just going to drain our tortellini now and set it to the side. Now that our sausage is cooked, I'm going to remove any excess grease in my pan. And here's why I love making this dinner so much. Now you're just going to add in 24 ounces of your favorite marinara sauce along with the reserved pasta water. Give this a stir and let it simmer on your stove for about 5 minutes. After those 5 minutes of simmering, go ahead and add your drained tortellini in along with about 3/4 cup of Parmesan cheese. Give this a stir, let the cheese melt down, and then it's ready to serve. I served our tortellini alongside of a side salad with spring mix, cherry tomatoes, sliced green onions, and dried cranberries and avocado. And then for the dressing, I just used this Bolthouse Farms Classic Ranch. It's really good and I do recommend it. This tortellini tastes like you spent hours and hours trying to make it, but it's just so simple to throw together. Now we're making this chicken broccoli with a creamy sun-dried tomato sauce, and this recipe's heavenly. To the pan on my stove, I have 2 tablespoons of hot olive oil. To the oil, I added 1 pound of cubed chicken breast. I added in a dash of Italian seasoning, salt, and pepper. I am going to stir this all together and let the chicken cook through at this point. Now that our chicken is cooked through, we are going to stir in about 2 tablespoons of minced garlic. Once the garlic becomes fragrant, you'll add in your 1/2 cup of sun-dried tomatoes. This is the brand I used. I think it's pretty good. I also chopped those sun-dried tomatoes into smaller pieces. Then you'll add in 2 cups of frozen broccoli florets. I did cut the broccoli into smaller pieces before I added it in, kind of like bite-sized pieces. Lastly, I added in a 1/2 cup of chicken broth. Scrape all those flavorful bits off your bottom of the pan and let it simmer for about 3 to 5 minutes or until the broccoli's tender. Then the last couple ingredients you'll add in is a 1/2 cup of heavy cream and 1 cup of shredded Colby Jack cheese. Stir this all together, let the cheese melt down, and then it's ready to serve. This dinner is definitely on my list of favorite dinners ever. There's not much more I could say about it than that. We like to serve ours over a bed of white rice, or you could serve it over mashed potatoes, egg noodles, or for a lower carb option, you could do cauliflower rice. I also served it with a side Caesar salad. Now we're making this chicken with zucchini and Parmesan cheese with smashed potatoes on the side. We're going to start on the smashed potatoes first. So in this pot of boiling water, I added about 1.5 pounds of golden potatoes. Boil these up and let them become fork tender. I have been getting so many requests to make these smashed potatoes, so I'm excited. Over to the pan on my stove, I have 2 tablespoons of hot olive oil in there. I added my 1.5 pounds of cubed chicken breast and I seasoned it with a dash of salt, pepper, Italian seasoning, onion powder, and garlic powder. I let the chicken cook through at this point. While we have our chicken cooking away, I am going to dice up our 1 yellow squash and 1 large zucchini. Now that our chicken is cooked through, I am going to remove it to a plate and I am going to set this plate to the side. In the same pan that we cooked that chicken in, I added in 2 tablespoons of butter along with a tablespoon of olive oil. Once the butter was melted and the oil was hot, I tossed in that squash and the zucchini. You're also going to be adding in seasonings at this point. I tossed in a dash of Italian seasoning, pepper, salt, and garlic powder, but you could add in any seasonings that you love. Give this a stir, scrape all those flavorful bits off the bottom of your pan, and let the zucchini and squash become soft. Now that my zucchini and squash are to the tenderness that I like them to be, I added back in our cooked chicken along with 1/3 cup of Parmesan cheese. Give this a stir, let the cheese melt down, and then it's ready to serve. But now we are going to finish up our smashed potatoes. So now that they are fork tender, I just strained the water out of my pot, and then I set the potatoes to the side to cool down for a second. We're going to work on the butter mixture now. In this bowl, I added in 3 tablespoons of butter. Next, add in 2 tablespoons of grated Parmesan cheese, along with 1/2 tablespoon of minced garlic, and then a dash of pepper and salt. Give this a stir. have my sheet pan here lined with parchment paper. I dumped those potatoes right on my sheet pan, and you are going to smash them now. So I'm using my potato masher, and I'm kind of smashing them into smaller pieces. Be careful, you don't want them to like fall into 100 different pieces. You don't want them to break apart. Just gently smash them. And then with that butter mixture, you are going to drizzle it over the top, and then put this in the oven under the broiler for a couple of minutes until the tops get nice and crispy. Here's what dinner looks like. That chicken and the zucchini and squash have amazing flavor. And then these smashed potatoes are so much fun to make, and they really are so flavorful and good. I also serve this with a side salad with spring mix, tomatoes, feta cheese, and avocado. Now we're making this pasta bolognese, and if you've never made anything like this before, you really need to. After I added my 2 tablespoons of olive oil to my Dutch oven and the oil was hot, I added in 2 stalks of celery that I sliced, 1 large carrot that I diced, and then also an onion that I diced. I let these vegetables saute for about 7 to 8 minutes or until they were soft. Now that they are soft, I'm adding in about 2 tablespoons of tomato paste. Stir the tomato paste in, and then you are going to be adding in 1 pound of ground beef. You do want to make sure you do use lean ground beef just to ensure that there's not very much grease in your pan in the end. And then just cook your ground beef through at this point. It's time now to add in 28 ounces of diced tomatoes, 2 teaspoons of Italian seasoning to give it extra flavor, and then a dash of salt and pepper. You'll also add in 3 cups of water along with a half a pound of fettuccine noodles. You are going to bring this up to a boil and then drop it down to a simmer and let this simmer uncovered on your stove for about 15 minutes. You do want to stir it frequently though, or until your noodles are cooked. Once your noodles are nice and tender, this is what it should be looking like. So I turned the heat off and I added in our half a cup of Parmesan cheese. I let the cheese melt down and then it was ready to serve. Here's my big bowl of food. I just sprinkled mine with a little bit of Parmesan cheese on the top and some fresh parsley, mainly for the looks, but this is definitely a family favorite in our home. I can make this every week and not get tired of it. It's that good. This chicken and rice casserole has always been a favorite. To get this one started, I'm shredding 4 carrots, and then I'm going to be dicing 1 medium onion into smaller pieces. Over to my stove, I have a tablespoon of hot olive oil. I'm just adding the carrots and the onion to it. I'm going to let this soften on my stove for about 3 to 5 minutes. Now that my veggies have softened, I'm adding my 1 pound of boneless, skinless chicken thighs that I cubed into smaller pieces. I'm seasoning them with some salt, pepper, onion powder, garlic powder, and paprika. I do want to let you know using chicken thighs for this recipe, in my opinion, is a lot better than chicken breast, just because the chicken thighs won't dry out. They'll be nice and juicy in the end. I'm going to cook these chicken thighs along with the veggies for a few minutes, just until the chicken thighs are about 80% of the way cooked, so not completely cooked. Jumping on over to my 9x13 baking dish, I'm spraying it with plenty of nonstick spray to ensure that the rice doesn't stick in the end. I just added the chicken mixture that we just made up to my baking dish, along with 1 cup of basmati rice, 2 cups of chicken broth. Then you'll stir this all together and then bake this covered with aluminum foil on 450 degrees for about 40 minutes or until your rice is nice and tender. Here's the finished product. This meal comes out super duper duper good. My family loves it, especially my little daughter. She's a big fan of this dinner. The chicken and the rice all together, everything has great flavor. Now we're making this savory beef and broccoli. To begin, right here, I have about 2 pounds of flank steak, just like this. You do want to make sure you cut the steak against the grain also. This will just help your steak become really nice and tender. Now we're going to work on the marinade. So in this bowl, I have about a tablespoon of minced garlic, and then I'm adding a tablespoon of ginger. I like to buy the ginger in the tube like that. It just makes my life easy. And then a 4 1/4 cup of fresh cilantro that I chopped, 1/4 cup of low sodium soy sauce, 1/4 cup of olive oil, and then a dash of salt. Whisk this marinade all together. I placed the steak that we cut up earlier into this glass bowl. Now add half of the marinade that we just made up right in there and give this a really good stir to coat the steak in the marinade. And then you are going to set this bowl to the side. On my sheet pan right here, go ahead and add your 3 cups of fresh broccoli florets, and then add your 2 cups of fresh white mushrooms, and then add the remainder of the marinade all over the top. And then give this a stir to coat the vegetables in the marinade. It's time to stir our steak in right with the vegetables, and then this baked on 425 degrees for about 10 to 12 minutes. And then I took it out of the oven, gave it a stir, and then I put it under the broiler for 2 minutes at a time until the steak was cooked to the way that I like it to be. Here's my plate of food. I served it over a bed of white rice. The steak was perfectly tender. Everything had amazing flavor. I do also want to mention to you that this recipe is fantastic if you want to meal prep it for lunches for the week or for dinners for the week. I have plenty more videos like this on my channel, so make sure you're subscribed. I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.